So let's talk about Claressa Shields' fight last night against Kaye Scott. Let's give it the boxing philosophy perspective. Now, Claressa Shields is a great fighter. From my perspective, I would say that she's truly elite. But some have been critical. There has been some issues, mainly due to the lack of knockout power and some political stumbling blocks. So let's first talk about the fight and give some understanding. So in round one, the noticeable thing here is that Claressa Shields has a lower sense of gravity. She basically has quite a low stance. And Claressa Shields is taking a dominant position. So in round one, she has a low sense of gravity. She's taking a dominant position and she's throwing some real strong counter punches. Claressa is feinting, looking for powerful counter opportunities. Now, Scott is feinting and moving, but can't get any rhythm with her punches. So this is clearly a Claressa Shields round. Moving into round two, Claressa Shields throws like a 20-punch flurry down the middle. So she's throwing the punches down the middle. And what Scott should do here, she should respond when Claressa stops to take a break, but she doesn't. And that's crucial. Claressa is using the shoulder roll. So she's using the shoulder roll. So when Scott throws the right hand, she's using the left shoulder to block it. And Claressa is controlling the pace and she's accelerating when she wants, and she's not being punished for that acceleration. Also on the inside, now mainly the fight is, I would say, on the outside and mid-range, but they do end up in the pocket in round two at one point, and Claressa unloads some good body shots. And I've noticed with Scott, she has an injury on her temple. So there's an injury on Kaye Scott's temple that's starting to develop. Now going into round three, Claressa Shields is now jabbing, and her hand is, it's not down to her waist, it's actually down to her thigh, which gives it a different angle. It gives it a different trajectory. Claressa is punching very hard and she lands a nice double jab, strong and powerful. Kaye Scott is tries the left hand counter, so she catches the right hand and tries the left hand counter. It's a nice idea. The theory is correct, but the implementation is not great. But the problem here is that what Scott needs to do, she needs to establish her jab. She really needs to establish her jab, establish her backhand, and start to get her timing, because at this point, Claressa is absolutely dominating. At one point, Scott Kaye steps to the right. And this, I think, creates a good angle for her, because what this does, it makes it harder for Claressa Shields to land the right hand, and she's really looking for the right hand at this point. Going into round four, Scott Kaye tries to establish the jab. She's throwing more jabs and she's also trying to feint. But even though she's throwing jabs, which is the right thing to do, they're not effective jabs. So that's one of the problems. There's good body work by Claressa again in the inside the pocket. There's some real nice right hooks to the body that look particularly damaging. Claressa is now throwing combinations to the body. And what Scott Kaye needs to do here is that she needs to counter. When Claressa Shields is unloading to the body, she needs to throw hard counters to the head, but she's unable to do that. So again, you know, after 4 rounds, I think Claressa Shields has clearly won every round. Going into round 5, Scott Kaye starts with multiple feints. So she's feinting. Again, it's the right thing to do, but she's feinting, but they're not effective feints. Claressa then starts to set a trap. She actually physically puts herself on the ropes. And what she's doing here, she's looking for a counter. Again, she puts herself on the ropes and she's using that shoulder roll. And again, she's throwing those right hand counters. Now, in fairness to Scott Kaye, she's clearly courageous. The second time Claressa puts herself on the ropes, Scott lets her hands go. And I think this is the right thing to do. However, by letting her hands go, by throwing multiples of punches, this gives Shields counter opportunities. It gives her opportunities to land the backhand. And because she's in that stance and because her legs are bent, she's getting maximum force into those counter punches. She's also throwing to the body as well. With regards to going on the ropes, this kind of reminds me of what Larry Holmes used to do later on in his career, particularly when he fought Evander Holyfield. He utilized this tactic well. And of course, James Toney was a master using the ropes. And Claressa Shields is now starting to throw the straight right, but when she throws it, she's not throwing it at the target, she's throwing it through the target. And the important thing to recognize here is that throughout these 5 rounds, Claressa Shields is taking risks. She's trying to be exciting. And this is important for building her brand. Going into round 6, Claressa comes out dominant. Again, her left shoulder is catching the right hand relatively easily. Scott needs to change the trajectory of the right hand, or she needs to make adjustments, throw the right hand behind a feint or throw it behind a double jab or change the angle. She needs to make adjustments, but she's not making the adjustments. And Claressa is starting again to let her hands go. And another flurry followed by a 2-3. A 2-3 is a straight right and a left hook. And Scott is in major trouble. And the ref is counting. So the ref is counting. I think the towel gets thrown in, but the referee lets the fight continue. And Claressa Shields is vicious at this point. She jumps right in and she's throwing loads of punches. And then the towel is thrown again, I believe. And this time the referee stops the fight. The left hook was a short left hook. It was like a straight right and a real short left hook. She didn't wind up on it, and Scott probably didn't see it. Now, I think it's important to recognize that before going into this fight, Claressa Shields is clearly an elite boxer. But this performance was a very exciting one. And the currency of excitement was desperately needed from Claressa Shields. And on this performance, Claressa Shields delivered. So on reflecting on this performance, let's discuss 9 ideas. So the first idea is that she got the knockout that she hadn't had in years, and she knew exactly what it meant. And the quote was, "I don't think I've had a knockout. It's been years." And the question is, why did the stoppage matter more than the win? Why? The lack of knockout power, to me, was a valid criticism. And in this fight, Claressa Shields, she addressed the criticism. And it's kind of drawn me to a conclusion that Claressa Shields is a perfectionist because she doesn't just want to win. It's not just the currency of winning. She wants to win spectacularly. And it wasn't just the win that meant so much to her. It was the way she won. And the way she won was emphatic. It's potentially viral. And this to me reveals perhaps an old school fighting mentality. And that's refreshing. She took risks, and she took risks to create greater excitement. It's important to realize that when you take risks, the more risks you take, the more danger there is. So you should always commend people that take tremendous risks. And she took risks to build the brand even further. She rolled the dice, and it worked. And I guess winning protects the record, but spectacular, what does that do? That builds the legacy. And Shields understood that sometimes greatness has to be felt, not merely recorded. And the next idea is that she states that she's in, I think the quote was, "I'm in my Mike Tyson era right now." And everybody shows up to the arena not to see if she wins, but how she finishes. And I guess one of the questions is she right that she's become the sport's must-see attraction, not just the best fighter? I guess when we talk about excitement, is excitement important, and why is excitement important? And excitement is important because excitement can create virality, and virality is essential within the algorithm. It's essential for the brand. Claressa Shields from inside the ring showed a viciousness in this fight, a viciousness perhaps that we haven't seen before. Mike Tyson, perhaps one of the most vicious fighters of all times. I wouldn't say that this was a Mike Tyson performance, but this was an impersonation of Claressa Shields being like Mike Tyson. There's a distinction there. She had a different psychology in this fight. And this type of psychology is going to build her brand even further. And let's remember, Claressa Shields is a big name in female boxing. Claressa Shields is an elite fighter, but she still has space to grow exponentially. And of course, as I've stated, there are some political barriers. It's important to remember that dominance creates respect, but destruction creates anticipation. And anticipation is what transforms a great fighter into an attraction. In other words, you can be a great fighter, but not a great brand. and the knockout that was essential. So the next idea is that she's still the woman who beat 22-0 Justina Hammer at when she had 9 wins and no losses, and she took Savannah Marshall's 0 in England and went undisputed in 3 weight classes. And I think the quote was, "No man or woman has the resume of Claressa Shields." Regardless if that statement is objectively true, let's deal with something that is true. Her resume is elite. I don't think there's any dispute there. Within the female boxing context, her resume is elite. But there is an issue. And what is that issue? Her issue is that her ladder is restricted due to political reasons. Let me explain. You have Jake Paul and you have Eddie Hearn, and they have a monopoly of 90% of female boxing real estate. And for Claressa Shields to continue to grow exponentially, that is a real problem that needs to be addressed. And it's important to realize that a fighter can control her preparation, a fighter can control their performance, but even greatness operates inside a business structure, and that business structure can restrict which ladders are available to climb. And then the next idea is the blessing and a curse truth. She's so good, she'll never have a 50-50 rival. You're never going to see a girl in the ring be 50-50 with me. That's her perspective. It's not going to happen according to her. Here's a question. How important is a dance partner for someone's career? How important is a dance partner for someone to go viral? Let's look at it. When you look at Muhammad Ali, he had George Foreman, an amazing dance partner. Joe Frazier, another amazing dance partner. When you look at Evander Holyfield, he had Mike Tyson. That's the dance partner. Riddick Bowe, another amazing dance partner in 3 absolutely vicious fights. You look at Sugar Ray Leonard, he had Roberto Duran, another incredible dance partner, and Marvin Hagler, the great Marvelous Hagler. And then, of course, you had Thomas Hearns. And I guess what we can deduce here is that a lot of elite fighters have elite dance partners. And maybe the thing that's missing from Claressa Shields is that elite dance partner. And, you know, great fighters create history, but great rivalries give that history a human face. Sometimes your greatest opponent becomes an essential part of your own immortality. And then the final idea is that she came down to 160 and immediately felt smaller and still stopped Kaye Scott. She stated, "I was punching with 160, which was never the weight class for me." The difference here was the psychology of Claressa. That was the difference. She did not come to box. She came to destroy. Think of this. When George Foreman fought Joe Frazier, he had that same perspective. George Foreman didn't go in with Joe Frazier to box. George Foreman came into the fight with Joe Frazier to have a savage fight. And that was a great fight. It was a vicious performance, and there were some vicious knockdowns in that fight. I guess to summarize that part, technique determines what a fighter can do, but mentality determines what she intends to do. And destruction begins as a psychological decision before it becomes a physical reality. And then the next idea is that the weak opponent narrative is a lie, and her team has the receipts. Lonnie Daniels and Daniel Perkins both got knockouts in their very next fight after losing to Shields. And I guess, what can we call this? Well, I guess that they would call this the minimization narrative, where you look at Claressa Shields' accomplishments and you try to minimize those accomplishments. But Claressa Shields, as we've established, is objectively elite within female boxing. But of course, people will still hate. That's probably a product of their nature rather than anything objectively true about Claressa Shields. But at the same time, we can still judge the competition without minimizing her accomplishments. So you can acknowledge that Claressa Shields is an elite operator, but question whether the opposition is elite. And in this sense, criticism becomes intellectually dishonest when evaluating the opposition turns into erasing the achievement. Context should sharpen judgment, not become a weapon for minimization. And then the next idea is that she's actually mapped out her own retirement. According to her, this is at age 38. 7 years left. The timer is ticking. One day it won't be that, according to her. She will retire at 38. I guess from my perspective, from an outsider looking in, I think it's good to have a plan, but it's also important to recognize that life is complicated and life has variables and life can disrupt a plan. So it's good to have a plan and it's good to have things that you want to achieve, but it's important to acknowledge that the variables of life can distort that plan. That's the first point. And I think the main thing should be this. The main context should be fight because you want to fight, not because you have to. So if you reach 36 and you don't want to do the preparation, you don't want to do the sparring, you don't want to do the mitts, and you don't want to get into the ring, and you don't want to be a public figure, and you don't want to be a legend, then maybe you should listen to that voice or listen to those voices. So I think I'm not sure if you can just say, okay, at this age, it's over. Because life happens and life changes and you never know what will happen in 8 years' time. But I understand, I think the sentiment here is that she won't be fighting past her prime. I think that's the sentiment. And I think that's important because in boxing, it's very hard to get up the mountain. It's very hard to become the 1%. But then it's even harder knowing the correct time to call it a day. And Claressa Shields, it's important to acknowledge, has a very experienced trainer and an experienced team. It's the former trainer of Sergey Kovalev, I believe. So, her trainer has a wealth of knowledge and a wealth of understanding, and their guidance and their mentorship is essential, not just about the decisions that she makes in the ring, but also about the decisions she makes outside of the ring. And the healthiest ending may be leaving boxing while the desire still belongs to you. That's crucial because there is a profound difference between choosing to fight and needing to fight. You still want to have that love. You still want to have that passion. And then the next idea is that the 16,000 tickets sold, the first time a woman has headlined an event at that number, is Shields building a career or building the case that women's boxing is the next big business? By the way, I'm not sure if that premise is entirely true, but the point is that female boxers headlining an event, this is good for female boxing, and female boxing needs to keep the momentum. It needs to keep the momentum. We need excitement and we need rivalries. We need marketing and we need investment. Female boxing has the potential to be exponentially huge. It has the potential to be really big. The problem, and I think it is a big problem, is that Eddie Hearn and Jake Paul, they own the real estate in female boxing. I believe they own 90% of the real estate in female boxing. So I would argue to get maximum leverage in female boxing, you need to collaborate with these entities. So in a sense, talent creates possibility, but industries, they grow through infrastructure. Women's boxing will only reach its ceiling. It will only reach its ceiling when performance, rivalry, and investment and distribution begin moving all in the same direction. And then finally, Claressa Shields states that God basically chose me to be number one and I trained to stay number one. She diets, she runs, she never gets complacent. Is this the secret to her dominance, a gift, or the refusal to ever rely on the gift? When you think of discipline, faith, and consistency, what is that? Well, when executed properly, it's a recipe for success. But it's easy to say it. It's easy to say that I have discipline, faith, and consistency. But it's excruciatingly hard to repeat that for 10 years, for 15 years, and 20 years. The point is the words are strong, but the actions are even stronger. And in a sense, talent may explain how somebody reaches the summit. So there may be an explanation there with regards to the power of talent, but discipline explains how they remain at the top of the summit. Because greatness is rarely one extraordinary act. It is ordinary sacrifice repeated over the years, time and time again. So that's the end of the video. Now I'm trying to build a digital boxing community, and that means I'm interested in your thoughts, I'm interested in your perspectives, and I'm interested in your observations. Now, if you want to support the channel, press like, hype, and subscribe. And if you want to watch more content like this, then simply click here or click here. As always, thanks for your time. It is much appreciated.